Jesus gave us a heads up. He warned that when certain events unfold, it's a point of no return. He provided 4 specific signs that would signal his impending return. What if I told you that Jesus didn't simply promise to return? He actually laid out 4 distinct warning signs that would appear just before his arrival. And once that final sign starts to manifest, it's game over, too late. That brings us to the first sign, one that should be impossible to miss for anyone paying attention. This first sign is global disasters, appearing like birth pangs. In Matthew 24, the disciples directly asked Jesus, "What will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age?" And he provided a detailed, systematic answer. The initial sign Jesus gave us involves a surge of disasters around the world. But here's where most people miss the point. These aren't signs of death, but rather birth pangs signaling something new being born. Listen carefully to what Jesus said in Matthew 24, verses 6 to 8. "You will hear of wars and rumors of wars. See that you are not alarmed, for this must take place, but the end is not yet. For nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are but the beginning of the birth pains." That phrase, "beginning of sorrows," is absolutely key. In the original Greek, it literally translates to birth pangs. Jesus is using the analogy of a woman in labor to describe the experience the world will undergo before his return. Now, what makes this analogy so powerful is that birth pangs have 3 distinct characteristics. They increase in frequency, they increase in intensity, and they point to something wonderful being born, despite the pain involved. Are we witnessing this pattern play out today? Wars and rumors of wars are constantly dominating the headlines. Nation is rising against nation, not just in outright military conflicts, but also in economic warfare, cyber attacks, and escalating international tensions that seem to worsen every month. Famines are impacting more people now than at any other time in recorded history, despite all our advanced agricultural technology. Earthquakes are being recorded with increasing frequency, and many scientists are admitting they don't fully understand why seismic activity seems to be intensifying in various regions across the globe. But here's what Jesus tells us about how we should respond to these events. See that you are not troubled. Why? Because these disasters aren't indicators that the world is ending in destruction. Instead, they signal that something new is being born. When a woman is in labor, the pain is intense, but everyone in the delivery room understands that the pain is productive. It's not pointless suffering. It's the necessary process that brings new life into the world. Jesus is telling us that the global chaos we're witnessing isn't some random series of catastrophes. It's the productive pain that precedes the birth of his kingdom on earth. But this is where it gets even more interesting. Birth pangs don't last forever. They increase in intensity until the moment of birth, and then the pain stops and new life emerges. Jesus is letting us know that these global disasters will culminate in his return and the establishment of his reign on earth. This should completely transform how we react to bad news. Instead of being overwhelmed by reports of wars, natural disasters, and global crises, we should be looking up because our redemption is drawing near. But this birth pang analogy leads us directly to the second sign, which isn't happening out in the world, but within the church itself. Sign number 2, the church in crisis and awakening. Here's where things get really personal, because the second sign Jesus gave us isn't happening somewhere else in the world. It's happening right inside the church. And when you see what Jesus predicted would happen to Christianity itself before his return, you'll understand why so many believers today feel like something has fundamentally shifted in the spiritual landscape. But here's what's going to blow your mind. This sign appears to contradict itself. Jesus described 3 things happening to the church simultaneously that, on the surface, seem impossible. The church will be shrinking and growing at the same time. It will be weaker and stronger. It will be more hated and more effective. How is that even possible? Stick with me, because when you grasp this paradox, you'll see why we might be closer to Christ's return than most people realize. Jesus said in Matthew 24, verses 9 to 14, "Then they will deliver you up to tribulation and put you to death, and you will be hated by all nations for my name's sake. And then many will fall away and betray one another and hate one another. And many false prophets will arise and lead many astray. And because lawlessness will be increased, the love of many will grow cold. But the one who endures to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be proclaimed throughout the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come." Let me break this down into 3 parts that are all happening right now. And by the time I'm finished, you'll see the genius of God's strategy for the end times. First, the hatred is going global. Jesus said Christians will be hated by all nations for his name's sake. Now, this isn't just the casual dislike or mockery that Christianity has always faced. This is systematic, international hostility that makes following Christ socially unacceptable and increasingly illegal. Christians are being fired from their jobs for their beliefs. Professional licenses are being revoked. Business owners are being sued for operating according to biblical principles. And here's the psychological warfare aspect. It's not just that Christians are being persecuted, they're being portrayed as the problem. The media narrative is that Christians are the intolerant ones, the dangerous ones, the ones who threaten social progress and harmony. Think about how clever this strategy is. Throughout history, when Christians were persecuted, they were seen as innocent victims. That generated sympathy and often led to more people converting to Christianity. But now, Christians are being persecuted while simultaneously being portrayed as the villains. That prevents the sympathy factor and actually makes the persecution seem justified to many people. This global shift in how Christianity is viewed didn't happen overnight. It's been building for decades, but the acceleration in just the last few years has been stunning. What used to be considered mainstream Christian beliefs are now being labeled as extremist views in many parts of the world. But here's what Jesus warned us about. This global hatred will create pressure inside the church that exposes who's really committed and who's just going through the motions. The second part of the sign is perhaps the most heartbreaking because it involves Christians themselves. Jesus said, "Many will be offended, and the love of many will grow cold." In other words, when following Christ becomes costly, a lot of people who claim to be believers will walk away from the faith. We're watching this happen on a massive scale right now. Church attendance has been declining rapidly in Western nations for years. But here's what's fascinating about this development. While it's painful to watch, it's actually fulfilling a necessary function. It's separating the wheat from the chaff. It's revealing who has genuine faith and who is just part of Christian culture. See, when Christianity was socially advantageous, or at least neutral, lots of people identified as Christians for reasons that had nothing to do with actually following Jesus. They liked the community, the moral framework, the cultural identity, or the business networking opportunities. But they never actually surrendered their lives to Christ. Now that following Christ comes with social costs, financial costs, and relational costs, those people are leaving. And while that's sad for individual families and local churches, it's actually purifying the global church. Jesus said this would happen. He told a parable about wheat and tares growing together until harvest time, when they would be separated. He said that in the last days, people's love would grow cold because of increasing lawlessness and moral confusion. But here's what's remarkable. While many are falling away, those who remain are becoming more committed, more passionate, and more bold than ever before. Which brings us to the third part of this sign. Now, here's where this gets really interesting, because while parts 1 and 2 describe the church shrinking and facing opposition, part 3 describes unprecedented success in reaching the world with the gospel. Jesus said, "This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in all the world as a witness to all nations, and then the end will come." Notice that he didn't say the gospel would be preached by a large, comfortable, popular church. He said it would be preached to all nations during a time when Christians are being persecuted and many are falling away. How is that possible? How can a smaller, more persecuted church have a greater global impact than a larger, more accepted church ever did? The answer reveals something profound about God's strategy and the power of authentic faith. First, persecution purifies the church's message. When Christians might face real consequences for their beliefs, they stop watering down the gospel to make it more palatable. They can't afford to be vague or compromising because only the real gospel is worth suffering for. Second, persecution authenticates the church's testimony. When people see Christians willing to face real costs for their faith, it makes their message more credible. Anyone can claim to believe something when it's convenient. But when someone maintains their faith under pressure, it makes people wonder what they know that others don't. Third, persecution activates the church's desperation. Comfortable Christians often lack urgency about evangelism. But when Christians realize that the window of opportunity might be closing, they become much more motivated to share the gospel while they still can. Organizations like Every Tribe, Every Nation report that the last unreached people groups are finally being engaged with the gospel through strategies that would have been unimaginable just decades ago. But here's what should give you chills. Jesus said that once the gospel has been preached to all nations as a witness, then the end will come. He's not talking about converting everyone. He's talking about giving everyone the opportunity to hear and respond. But Jesus warned that during this time of church crisis and global evangelism, there would be another dangerous element: false prophets who would deceive many people. These aren't just obvious cult leaders or crazy people on street corners. These are sophisticated deceivers who understand Christian language and know how to appeal to what people want to hear. They tell people that things are getting better, that human progress will solve our problems, that we don't need to worry about judgment or the return of Christ. Still, other false prophets redefine the gospel itself. They say that all religions lead to God, that good people go to heaven regardless of their beliefs, that Jesus was just a good teacher rather than the only way to salvation. But here's what makes these false prophets particularly dangerous. They often mix truth with lies. They quote scripture. They talk about love and compassion. They address real problems that people are facing, but they lead people away from dependence on Christ and toward dependence on human solutions. Jesus warned us about this because he knew that when Christians are under pressure, they would be tempted to listen to teachers who promise easier paths. When following Christ becomes difficult, false prophets offer alternative approaches that seem more manageable. The endurance factor. This is why Jesus emphasized endurance as the key to making it through this period. He said, "But he who endures to the end will be saved." Now, this isn't about earning salvation through good works or perseverance. This is about demonstrating the reality of salvation by remaining faithful even when it becomes costly. Think about it this way. If someone claims to be a Christian, but abandons their faith the moment it becomes inconvenient, what does that tell you about whether their faith was ever real in the first place? Jesus is saying that genuine believers will endure through the persecution, the falling away, and the deception because they have something that can't be taken away from them, an actual relationship with the living God. But endurance doesn't mean passive survival. It means active faithfulness. It means continuing to share the gospel even when it's dangerous. It means maintaining biblical convictions even when they're unpopular. It means loving fellow believers even when they're being betrayed by people they trusted. So now you can see how all three parts of the sign work together to accomplish God's purposes. The global persecution removes fake Christians and reveals who has real faith. The falling away purifies the church and clarifies the gospel message. The false prophets provide a test that separates those who love truth from those who prefer comfortable lies. And the result is a smaller but more powerful church that reaches the entire world with an undiluted gospel message delivered by people who are obviously willing to die for what they believe. It's like refining gold. You put ore through intense heat and pressure, and the impurities burn away, leaving behind pure gold that's more valuable than the original or ever was. That's what's happening to the global church right now. The persecution is the heat. The falling away is the impurities being burned off. And what's left is pure gold, Christians who are so committed to Jesus that nothing can shake their faith. And here's what should encourage you. If you're feeling the pressure, if you're watching people around you fall away, if you're seeing the cost of following Christ increase in your own life, you're not experiencing something unexpected. You're experiencing exactly what Jesus said would happen before his return. The question isn't whether these things will continue to intensify. Jesus guaranteed they would. The question is whether you'll be among those who endure to the end. But this church sign, as significant as it is, leads us directly to the third sign, which will be centered on one specific city that's been at the center of God's plan throughout history. Sign number 3, Jerusalem's crisis and the abomination of desolation. Now we come to the sign that should send chills down your spine, because this one is geographically specific, historically unprecedented, and marks the absolute point of no return. When this third sign appears, Jesus said the final countdown will have begun, and everything that follows will be the most intense period of suffering in human history. But here's what's fascinating. This sign requires specific conditions to be in place that seemed impossible for most of the last 2,000 years. Yet today, for the first time since Jesus spoke these words, all the pieces are falling into place. And when you see what's happening behind the scenes in Jerusalem right now, you will understand why many prophecy scholars believe we could be the generation that witnesses this sign. Jesus said in Matthew 24, verses 15 to 22, "So when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel, standing in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house, and let the one who is in the field not turn back to take his cloak. And alas for women who are pregnant and for those who are nursing infants in those days. Pray that your flight may not be in winter or on a Sabbath." For then there will be great tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until now, no, and never will be. Notice how Jesus shifts his tone when he gets to this sign. He becomes urgent, specific, almost frantic. He tells people not to pack, not to gather belongings, just to run for their lives. Why such extreme urgency? Because this sign marks the moment when time runs out. What is the abomination of desolation? To understand what Jesus is referring to, we have to go back to the prophet Daniel, who described this event in stunning detail over 500 years before Jesus was born. Daniel saw a vision of a future ruler who would emerge on the world stage and initially appear to be a peacemaker and problem solver. This person, whom the Bible calls by various names, including the Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, and the beast, will make a 7-year covenant with Israel and many other nations. For the first 3.5 years of this agreement, he'll appear to be the greatest leader in human history. He'll solve international conflicts, bring peace to the Middle East, enable global prosperity, and even allow the Jews to rebuild their temple. But then, at the midpoint of those 7 years, he'll reveal his true nature. Daniel 9 verse 27 says, "And he shall confirm the covenant with many for 1 week, and in the midst of the week he shall cause the sacrifice and the oblation to cease, and for the overspreading of abominations he shall make it desolate, even until the consummation, and that determined shall be poured upon the desolate." The abomination of desolation is the moment when this leader enters the rebuilt temple in Jerusalem, declares himself to be God, and demands worship from all humanity. It's not metaphorical, it's a literal person doing literal things in a literal place. But here's what makes this prophecy remarkable. It requires conditions that didn't exist for most of the last 2,000 years. First, the temple must be rebuilt. There must be a temple in Jerusalem for this to happen. When Jesus spoke these words, the second temple was still standing. But in 70 AD, just as Jesus had predicted, the Romans destroyed it completely. For nearly 2,000 years, there has been no temple in Jerusalem. But here's what should grab your attention. For the first time since 70 AD, serious preparations are being made to rebuild the temple. The Temple Institute in Jerusalem has been working for decades to recreate all the vessels, instruments, and priestly garments needed for temple worship according to biblical specifications. They've trained hundreds of men from the tribe of Levi to serve as priests. They've bred red heifers that could be used for the purification rituals required before temple service can begin. Architectural plans have been drawn up. The location has been surveyed. The political groundwork is being laid. All that's missing is the right political climate to make construction possible. But it's not just the physical preparation that's significant, it's the spiritual preparation. Orthodox Jewish communities around the world are experiencing renewed interest in temple worship. Young Jewish men are studying the intricate laws of temple service. Rabbinical schools are offering courses on temple-related topics that haven't been relevant for 2,000 years. The psychological and spiritual conditions for temple rebuilding are developing alongside the physical preparations. Second, Jerusalem must be under Jewish control for this prophecy to be fulfilled. For most of the last 2,000 years, Jerusalem was controlled by various Gentile powers: Romans, Byzantines, Muslims, Crusaders, Ottomans, and British. But in 1967, during the Six-Day War, Israel regained control of Jerusalem for the first time since 70 AD. This wasn't just a political victory, it was a prophetic milestone that many scholars believe started the countdown to the final fulfillment of Jesus' prophecies. However, the situation is more complex than simple political control. The Temple Mount itself, the location where the temple must be rebuilt, is currently administered by an Islamic authority called the Waqf. The Dome of the Rock and Al-Aqsa Mosque sit on the Temple Mount, making it one of the most contested religious sites in the world. But here's what's developing behind the scenes. There are increasing discussions about creative solutions that could allow for Jewish temple worship alongside the existing Islamic structures. Some proposals involve building the temple on a different part of the Temple Mount. Others suggest underground construction. Still others propose sharing arrangements that would allow both religions to use the site. What seemed impossible just decades ago, Jews worshiping on the Temple Mount, is now being seriously discussed by political and religious leaders on both sides. Third, there must be a world leader with enough influence and credibility to broker a peace agreement that would make temple rebuilding possible. This person must be trusted by Israelis, Palestinians, Arab nations, European powers, and the United States simultaneously. Throughout most of history, no single individual could have commanded that level of international respect and authority. But we're living in an era of global communication, international institutions, and interconnected economies that make such worldwide influence possible for the first time. We've already seen how quickly a charismatic leader can capture global attention and support. Social media, 24-hour news cycles, and instant communication mean that someone could emerge on the world stage and gain international prominence within months rather than years. But it's not just about charisma. This person will need to demonstrate real problem-solving ability. The challenges facing the world today, economic instability, international conflicts, environmental concerns, technological disruption, are creating demand for the kind of comprehensive leadership that the Antichrist will appear to provide. The deception factor. But here's what makes the Abomination of Desolation so shocking. It won't appear evil when it happens. For 3.5 years before this event, the Antichrist will be the most popular, successful, and admired leader in human history. Think about what he'll accomplish during those first 3.5 years. He'll bring peace to the Middle East, something that has seemed impossible for decades. He'll enable the rebuilding of the temple, fulfilling the deepest dreams of religious Jews. He'll solve international conflicts, stabilize the global economy, and appear to usher in a new age of human prosperity and cooperation. But then comes the moment that changes everything, the ultimate blasphemy. 2 Thessalonians 2 verses 3-4 describes what happens when the Antichrist finally reveals his true nature. Let no one deceive you in any way. For that day will not come, unless the rebellion comes first and the man of lawlessness is revealed, the son of destruction, who opposes and exalts himself against every so-called God or object of worship, so that he takes his seat in the temple of God, proclaiming himself to be God. The person who has been Israel's greatest protector becomes their greatest persecutor. The leader who enabled temple worship demands to be worshipped in the temple. The man who brought peace to Jerusalem turns Jerusalem into the center of global conflict. But it's not just that he claims to be a god, he claims to be the God. He doesn't present himself as one deity among many, but as the ultimate divine authority who deserves worship from all humanity. And here's what makes this particularly blasphemous. He does this in the most sacred space in Judaism, the Holy of Holies in the rebuilt temple. It's the ultimate desecration of the most holy place on earth. Jesus said that when this happens, the response should be immediate flight. Don't pack. Don't gather belongings. Don't say goodbye to neighbors. Just run for your lives. Why such urgency? Because the Abomination of Desolation triggers what Jesus called Great Tribulation, such as has not been from the beginning of the world until this time, no, nor ever will be. This isn't just another difficult period in history. Jesus is saying that what follows the Abomination of Desolation will be worse than every previous catastrophe combined. Worse than the flood. Worse than the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah. Worse than any war, famine, plague, or natural disaster that has ever occurred. And it won't be limited, not just one region or a single group of people will face this. The persecution that's coming will be worldwide and meticulously planned. Revelation 13 verse 7 tells us, the beast was given power over every tribe, people, language, and nation. But this won't be just senseless, random violence. It'll be a highly organized, technologically advanced, and totally comprehensive system. The very same structure that allowed the Antichrist to create a false sense of peace and prosperity will be twisted into a tool of total oppression and control. This is when the mark of the beast system, as described in Revelation 13, will be fully put into effect. Everyone will be required to have a mark on their right hand or their forehead, and without it, they won't be able to buy or sell anything. Here's the really unsettling thing about the timing of all this. This system of economic control will be put in place right after the Abomination of Desolation. Anyone who refuses to worship the Antichrist will immediately be cut off from the global economy. Just think about how incredibly complex a system like that would have to be. It would demand global financial networks that could be controlled by a single central authority, identification technology that's impossible to counterfeit or transfer, surveillance systems capable of tracking every single transaction, and international cooperation that goes beyond traditional political borders. All of these technologies already exist today or are very close to it. What sounded like pure science fiction when John wrote Revelation 2,000 years ago is now technically possible with the technology we have right now. The deception carried out by this false Messiah will, ironically, prepare Israel to receive the true Messiah when he finally returns. But here's what should create a sense of urgency in your heart. Jesus said that the Abomination of Desolation marks the exact midpoint of the final 7 years. Once that event takes place, there are precisely 3.5 years left until he comes back. That means that when you see the sign, you'll know exactly how much time is left. Not approximately, not roughly, but with absolute precision. The clock will literally be counting down, day by day, toward the second coming. But here's a sobering thought. Jesus also indicated that by the time this particular sign appears, it will already be too late for most people to change their eternal destiny. The decisions that determine where people will spend eternity will have already been made before the abomination of desolation even occurs. So, where do we stand today? Are we seeing things moving toward the conditions that would make this sign possible? The answer to that should really alarm you. For the first time in 2,000 years, all the pieces of the puzzle are either in place already or are rapidly being developed. Israel controls Jerusalem and is actively preparing to rebuild the temple. The stage is definitely being set for all of these events to happen very quickly when the timing is right. And that brings us to the fourth and final sign, which will be absolutely impossible to miss, because it will be visible to every single person on earth at the same time. But here's what you absolutely need to understand about this third sign. It doesn't just mark the midpoint of the tribulation period. It marks the point where human history itself reaches its ultimate climax. Everything that's happened since the fall of man in the Garden of Eden has been building toward this very moment, when the ultimate rebellion against God will take place in the ultimate sacred space. The Abomination of Desolation is Satan's last, desperate attempt to seize the worship that belongs to God alone. It's the culmination of human pride, the ultimate expression of rebellion against divine authority, and it's the event that triggers God's final response to human sin. When you see this sign, you'll know without a doubt that the end of the age has arrived and that the return of the true king is just around the corner. Sign number 4, God turns off the lights. The fourth sign that Jesus gave us is cosmic in scale, and it will serve as the absolute final warning that his return is imminent. This isn't a sign that you have to interpret or even debate about. It will be completely obvious to everyone on the planet. Jesus said in Matthew 24 verses 29 to 31, immediately after the distress of those days the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, the stars will fall from the sky, and the heavenly bodies will be shaken. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in heaven. And then all the peoples of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. Notice the exact order of events. First, all natural light sources will stop working entirely. The sun will go dark. The moon won't give any light. The stars will fall from the sky. Then and only then, Jesus will appear in blazing glory that will be visible to absolutely everyone on earth at the exact same time. This cosmic sign is described consistently throughout the entire Bible. The prophet Isaiah said, "The heavens will be rolled up like a scroll." The prophet Joel described the very same darkening of the sun and the moon. The book of Revelation gives us even more details about this cosmic shaking. But here's what's so incredibly remarkable about this fourth sign. It serves a very specific purpose. God turns off all natural light sources in order to prepare the way for the supernatural light of Christ's return. Think about it for a second. If Jesus were to appear in his full glory while the sun was still shining, people might miss it entirely, or they might try to explain it away with some kind of rationalization. But when all natural light suddenly disappears, and then Christ appears as the only source of light in the entire universe, there will be absolutely no mistaking what's happening. This is exactly why Jesus said that when he returns, it will be like lightning that flashes in the east and is visible all the way to the west. Every single eye will see him. There will be absolutely no debate about whether it's really Jesus or just someone claiming to be him. But here's what this means in terms of the timing of these signs. The cosmic darkening will happen immediately after the tribulation of those days. This places the fourth sign at the very, very end of the tribulation period, just moments before Christ's actual return. When you see the sun, moon, and stars stop giving light, you'll know without a doubt that Jesus is about to appear. At that point, it will be far too late to prepare spiritually. The time for making a decision will be over. For those who have been watching and waiting with anticipation, the darkening of the heavens will be the unmistakable signal that their redemption has finally arrived. And this brings us to the important lesson that Jesus taught about recognizing the seasons. The fig tree lesson, recognizing the seasons. After describing these four signs in detail, Jesus gave his disciples a simple analogy to help them understand the timing of these events. The lesson of the fig tree. Jesus said in Matthew 24 verses 32 to 34, Now learn this lesson from the fig tree. As soon as its twigs get tender and its leaves come out, you know that summer is near. Even so, when you see all these things, you know that it is near, right at the door. Truly I tell you, this generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. This isn't some kind of complicated symbolic prophecy. It's a very straightforward lesson about being able to recognize the changing of seasons. Just as you can tell that summer is approaching by watching how trees respond to the seasonal changes, you can tell that Jesus' return is approaching by watching how these 4 specific signs begin to develop. The church crisis will begin with subtle compromises and gradually become obvious persecution and a widespread falling away from the faith. The situation in Jerusalem will develop as political conditions continue to shift and preparations for the temple start to really advance. The cosmic signs will happen at the very end as the final and unmistakable warning. But here's what Jesus specifically emphasized. When you see all these things, know that it is near, right at the door. He's not talking about seeing just 1 or 2 of these signs. He's talking about seeing all 4 signs in their various developing stages. And that's exactly what we're witnessing in the world today. We're seeing the very beginning stages of all 4 of the signs that Jesus described. Global disasters are steadily increasing in both frequency and intensity. The church is currently facing unprecedented pressure, while at the same time, it's reaching more of the world than ever before with the life-changing gospel. Jerusalem is quickly becoming the center of international attention, and preparations for rebuilding the temple are advancing at a rapid pace. The cosmic signs are still in the future, but the stage is being set for everything that Jesus described to come to pass. This should radically change the way we're living our lives right now. So, what do we do with all of this information? How should understanding these 4 signs change the way we live today? First and foremost, Jesus repeatedly warned us not to be deceived. In Matthew 24, he mentions deception more than any other potential danger. False Christs, false prophets, and false teachers will multiply as we get closer and closer to the end times. Our only real protection against deception is to know exactly what Jesus actually said about these signs and to compare everything we hear with the teachings of Scripture. Second, Jesus told us not to be afraid. Yes, these are definitely serious times, and yes, there are difficult days ahead. But for those who truly belong to Christ, these signs aren't threats. They're actually promises that our ultimate redemption is drawing near. Third, Jesus emphasized the critical importance of endurance. He said, "But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved." This isn't about trying to earn our salvation through good works. It's about demonstrating the genuine reality of our salvation by remaining faithful, even when following Christ becomes incredibly costly. Fourth, Jesus called us to active preparation. He didn't give us these signs so that we could just sit back passively and simply wait for him to return. He gave them to us so that we would recognize the urgency of the times we're living in and then invest our lives in things that truly matter for all of eternity. The gospel absolutely must be preached to all nations before the end finally comes. The people all around us need to hear about Jesus while there's still time for them to respond. Our families, our friends, our coworkers, our communities, they all need to understand what's coming and how to prepare themselves spiritually. But here's the most important truth of all. While these signs certainly indicate that difficult times are ahead, they also guarantee that Jesus is indeed coming back. Every single birth pang that shakes the world, every instance of persecution that hits the church, every significant development in Jerusalem, every cosmic sign that appears in the heavens, all of it points to the exact same glorious conclusion. King Jesus is returning to establish his eternal kingdom right here on earth. The real question isn't whether these things will happen. Jesus guaranteed that they absolutely would. The real question is whether or not you'll be truly ready when they do. If you've never fully surrendered your life to Jesus Christ, these signs should create a profound sense of urgency deep down in your heart. The time for spiritual preparation is right now, while His grace is still readily available, and while His incredible offer of salvation is still open to you. If you're already a believer, these signs should ignite a burning passion in your heart for the things that truly matter for eternity. Time is short. The opportunities to make a real difference for the kingdom of God are undeniably limited. The season of Christ's return is rapidly approaching, but for all of us who believe, these signs should fill our hearts with an overwhelming sense of hope. We're not watching the random and meaningless collapse of civilization. We're watching the precise unfolding of God's perfect plan to restore His creation and establish His eternal reign of justice and peace. The King is coming. The signs are clearly appearing. The time is near. Are you ready for his return?